A congresswoman just stood up in the House Oversight Committee and exposed the entire Trump administration cover-up of the Epstein files using a timeline that proves Donald Trump promised to release everything, then broke the law to hide it. And she held up actual pages from the so-called release showing they're completely blacked out. And then she asked the question nobody on the Republican side could answer. If Trump promised transparency hundreds of times during his campaign, why has his Department of Justice only released 1% of the files 6 months after the legal deadline? And somehow, the Republicans on this committee are spending their time trying to jail Bill Clinton instead of holding their own attorney general accountable for breaking federal law. So this past week, the House Oversight Committee held a hearing on holding the Clintons in contempt of Congress for not complying with a subpoena about the Epstein files. That's the session where they debate whether to recommend criminal charges against someone for defying Congress. And what came out of that hearing is one of the clearest examples of a cover-up happening in real time while Republicans pretend to care about transparency and accountability. Representative Delia Ramirez from Illinois spent about 10 minutes absolutely destroying the Republican narrative by walking through exactly how we got here, who's actually breaking the law, and why the Trump administration is protecting someone. Take a look at this, and I'll give you my breakdown at the end.
Comment, and I have a friendly question for my colleague, Ms. Luna. And I'll say a friendly question. I've worked with victims for decades. So few opportunities present themselves for victims to sit face to face with folks who hold power, to beg and plead that everyone who had anything to do with their harm be held to account. So few opportunities. I have been a victim advocate where brilliant young women who have been trafficked across this country have stood in courtrooms and were demanded to testify against their traffickers, and they did with such power and grace in fear that their lives may be taken because of that braveness. And a number of those young women that I witnessed take all that they had to confront their demons, they were murdered because they took a stand. And so when we did stand in front and sit in front of those victims and they gave us their all, I hope that this is not the only opportunity, Mr. Chair, to speak on their behalf. From our president to everyone in those files, forget all the political games. If these women who are connected with the largest sex trafficking ring in modern day American history cannot get justice, what about the girls in every single state? I mean, it is what it is. That being said, Ms. Luna, you talked briefly about a proposal.
She's not in.
She's out.
That's both.
There was a proposal put on the table to rethink how we might have a conversation about the Clintons or President Clinton coming in and having a conversation with this body. And I guess that time has passed, but I know that I would love to hear from the former president of the United States. I would love to hear from the Attorney General. I would love to hear from the current president of these United States. The victims deserve to be heard. The victims deserve for the files to be released in their entirety, and the victims deserve for us to get to the bottom of this matter. I yield back. Well, I actually would like to yield my time to the ranking member.
Actually, I'm okay right now on time. I might come back around, but back to Mr. Comer and the Republicans. Thank you, Ms. Simon.
Okay. Do any other members seek recognition? Seeing none, we are going to, there's an amendment at the desk Well, let's, Ms. Lee, what purpose do you seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Will the clerk distribute the amendment to all members? The clerk will designate the amendment.
An amendment to the amendment in nature of a substitute to the William J. Clinton contempt report as offered by Ms. Lee of Pennsylvania.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read. I reserve a point of order. The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that even listening to this debate throughout our hearing today, our markup today, I think it's really clear that at the heart of this effort to release the Epstein files are very real human beings who have experienced unimaginable harm. They have been repeatedly victimized by the indifference of the U.S. government and the injustice that they face. They deserve peace and healing and justice. When my motion to subpoena the Epstein files passed, this committee resolved to get that justice for those survivors. And I thank Chairman Comer for pushing this effort forward by issuing additional subpoenas for the Epstein estate and the banks. And we know that without the full files from the DOJ, that is just not enough. That's why I'm introducing this amendment, which holds Attorney General Pam Bondi in civil contempt for failing to comply with the August 5th subpoena, and I urge my colleagues to support it. And we believe that we should start with civil contempt because we are serious about this investigation. We want these files and we want to hear from them. And we must start there. The Department of Justice needs to be the priority. We can move to noncompliance by anyone else, including Ghislaine Maxwell, after we have received those files. It has been 5 months, and we're still missing over 5 million pages of documents purportedly. The Department of Justice has only released 1% of those files. They have stonewalled this committee since August, and they have failed to provide even the most basic updates. How is that not an insult both to the authority of this committee and the survivors? Without the full files, how can we know who might have legitimate knowledge or who might be culpable? We wouldn't have to speculate on the Clintons or anyone else's involvement if we had all of those files. And to be clear, I'm certainly not opposed to the President and Secretary Clinton being held accountable for violating the subpoena. But the fact that this effort to hold the Clintons in contempt was fast-tracked and is happening before any action against the Justice Department is just evidence that the Republicans on this committee are not taking this investigation seriously. It is an unequal application of law. And again, it is a bit ironic that these contempt resolutions empower the Justice Department to imprison possibly 2 people for defying the exact same subpoena that they themselves are defying. If this committee wants to be taken seriously, we would be addressing all the bad actors in this investigation, not cherry picking them for political points. The Justice Department needs to be held accountable for their non-compliance and lack of transparency. They have been selectively producing information, shielding powerful people, and obstructing any efforts for oversight. And if we don't hold them accountable, Mr. Chair, we are too. Just this past Friday, Attorney General Bondi asked a New York federal judge to deny an appointment of a special master to monitor the release of the Epstein files. They don't want a neutral third party making sure they follow the law. I think all of us should be questioning what the Justice Department is doing that they don't want the American people to see. We can't just take them at their word that they'll eventually get around to releasing the files. Quite frankly, they have put up the same, if not far less of an action as the Clintons have. What little information they've released so far has either already been made public or has been a mess of just sketchy redactions. A group of survivors sent a letter to the Justice Department's Inspector General complaining that the redactions had been, quote, selective. They pointed out that multiple times the names of alleged abusers appeared to be redacted, Yet some survivors' names and identifying information were released. To be clear, the subpoena I moved to secure does not allow for redactions unless it would protect the identity of a survivor or contains child sex abuse materials. They have had plenty of time to work with this committee to protect survivors' identities. This is bigger than one case. It's about rich and powerful people being protected by each other and institutions. It's about a system that has enabled Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and whoever their co-conspirators are to buy favors and silence from our government. This effort is the one time we could get some real accountability and reclaim the power of this system. Republicans, don't drop the ball by allowing Pam Bondi and the Department of Justice to play us for fools. Mr. Chair, you are setting a precedent that non-compliance with this committee will result in immediate contempt proceedings. So I challenge you and my Republican colleagues to put your money where your mouth is and pass this amendment in holding Pam Bondi in contempt. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I'll recognize myself just for amendment. Look, I oppose this amendment, and I hope everyone on the committee opposes this. That's because Attorney General Bondi and the Department of Justice, they have released documents. Again, not at the speed or pace that any of us want, but they are complying with our subpoena. That is a fact. I oppose your amendment, Ms. Lee, because you amend the criminal to civil. And I think that most of what I'm hearing from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle is everyone wants to hear from the Clintons. They've had an opportunity for 5 months. They will have another opportunity between today's vote and the floor to come in and answer questions. Pam Bondi is coming in front of Congress in less than 2 weeks to answer questions. Your colleague, Ms. Crockett, I don't want to speak for Ms. Crockett, but I'm pretty confident Ms. Crockett's going to grill Pam Bondi, right? You agree with me? I would have won that bet.
Is she coming with the facts? Is she coming with the facts?
Well, we'll see. I think that's a good, she may. I hope she does. So I oppose this. Now, Chair recognizes.
All right, let's talk about what you just watched, because this is how cover-ups work in 2026. Representative Ramirez just walked through a timeline that proves Donald Trump and his administration are actively covering up the Epstein files while pretending they care about transparency, and she did it with receipts. Let's start with what Trump promised. During the entire 2024 campaign, Trump said over and over that he would declassify the Epstein files. He said it at rallies. He said it in interviews. He used it to fire up his base. J.D. Vance said in October 2024, quote, "Seriously, we need to release the Epstein list. That was the pitch. Vote for us and we'll expose everyone involved in Jeffrey Epstein's crimes." Day one, transparency, accountability. That's what they promised. Then Trump won. And the moment he had the power to actually do it, that promise disappeared. In February 2025, Attorney General Pam Bondi released a statement saying the DOJ was following through on President Trump's commitment to transparency. She said the department was going to lift the veil on Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. That was February. And then nothing happened. By July 2025, Trump started walking it back. He literally said, "Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years." That's when people realized he wasn't going to keep his promise. So Congress stepped in. On July 23rd, 2025, this committee issued a subpoena to the Department of Justice demanding the full Epstein files. That subpoena has been legally binding since July. Pam Bondi and the DOJ have been required by law to produce those documents for 6 months. They haven't done it. And then Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act. This was a bipartisan bill. It passed almost unanimously. One member of Congress voted against it. One. Everyone else said release the files. The bill required the DOJ to release the unredacted Epstein files publicly by December 19, 2025. Trump signed that bill into law, and then his DOJ ignored it. Here's where it gets worse. The DOJ blew past that December 19th deadline. They've released approximately 1% of the files, and Ramirez held up one of those pages during the hearing. It's completely blacked out. The redactions are so extensive you can't read anything. And according to the law Congress passed, those redactions are illegal. The statute specifically limits redactions to protecting survivor identities and removing child sexual abuse material. That's it. But the DOJ is redacting names of alleged abusers while leaving some survivor names visible. Survivors sent a letter to the DOJ Inspector General complaining that the redactions look selective and intentional. So let's recap. Trump campaigned on releasing the files. He won. His attorney general said they'd release the files. Congress issued a subpoena for the files. Congress passed a law requiring the files to be released. Trump signed that law. And now his DOJ has released 1% of the files, illegally redacted 6 months late, while in violation of both a congressional subpoena and federal law. And what are Republicans doing about it? They're trying to jail Bill Clinton. Ramirez pointed this out directly. She said, instead of holding the Attorney General accountable for this failure, the majority is trying to change the subject today. She's right. Pam Bondi has violated a congressional subpoena. She's violated federal law. And Republicans won't even bring her before this committee. They keep saying she'll testify before the Judiciary Committee in 2 weeks, but that's not the committee leading this investigation. This is. And they won't hold her accountable. Ramirez also brought up something most people don't know. When the discharge petition to force a vote on the Epstein Files Transparency Act was one signature away from passing, Speaker Mike Johnson shut down Congress. He refused to swear in Representative-elect Adelita Grijalva for 7 weeks to keep her name off that petition. He forced a government shutdown to protect Trump and cover up the Epstein files. And when it became clear the bill would pass anyway, Johnson finally let it through so he wouldn't lose the vote. That's how badly they didn't want this bill to pass. Now, here's the part that should terrify you. On December 23rd, the DOJ suddenly announced they discovered over 1 million additional files related to Epstein. Conveniently, right after missing the deadline. They claimed they just found them, 1 million files. And every time they miss a deadline or get pressured, they find more files or claim they need more time to review. It's a stall tactic, and it's coordinated. Ramirez asked the question that no Republican could answer. Who is the president protecting? Because we know Trump only cares about one person, and the evidence is overwhelming. There are documented communications between Trump and Epstein. There's a signed birthday note from Trump containing explicit sexual references mentioning wonderful secrets between them. There are emails from Epstein saying Trump knew about the girls. Trump himself admitted he knew Epstein was a creep and that Epstein recruited girls from Mar-a-Lago. Trump said he wants to cover up the files because my friends will get hurt. And yet Trump's name is absent from this investigation. Republicans won't subpoena him. They won't ask Pam Bondi why she's protecting him. They won't hold her in contempt for violating their subpoena. Instead, they're going after Bill Clinton, who offered to provide sworn testimony, who's been negotiating through his lawyers for 5 months, and who they admitted on the record has been trying to comply. Let me be clear about what the law says. The Epstein Files Transparency Act that Congress passed and Trump signed into law required the DOJ to release the files by December 19, 2025. That deadline passed over a month ago. The committee subpoena from July required the DOJ to produce documents by August 19, 2025. That deadline passed 6 months ago, and the DOJ has produced 1% of the files, illegally redacted in direct violation of federal law. This isn't a conspiracy theory. Ramirez held up the pages. They're blacked out. She cited the statute. It's clear. She laid out the timeline. Trump promised transparency, signed a law requiring it, and then his DOJ violated that law while Republicans looked the other way. Here's what this actually means. If the Trump administration is willing to break federal law to hide the Epstein files, what else are they hiding? If Pam Bondi can ignore a congressional subpoena and face zero consequences while the committee tries to jail Bill Clinton for negotiating the terms of his testimony, what does that say about accountability? If 99% of the files remain hidden after Trump campaigned on releasing them, who is he protecting? And if Republicans are willing to spend months trying to hold Democrats in contempt while refusing to hold their own attorney general accountable for breaking the law, this isn't about justice for Epstein's victims. It's about protecting Donald Trump. Like, subscribe and share this everywhere.